Hey, everybody, and welcome to Common Good Conversations, a podcast creating deeper narratives at the intersection of faith and politics for the common good in West Michigan. I'm your host, Nick Brock. Sean Skinner is away at dance camp. Listener, I've got a great conversation for you today because I have the privilege of being in conversation with David Gushee. The Reverend Professor Dr. David P. Gushee is Distinguished University Professor of Christian Ethics at Mercer University and Chair of Christian Social Ethics at Free University Amsterdam and Senior Research Fellow at International Baptist Theological Study Center. David is the elected past president of both the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Christian Ethics, signaling his role as one of America's leading Christian ethicists. Also, he is the author, co-author, editor, or co-editor of more than 28 books and over 175 academic book chapters, journal articles, and reviews. And finally, his most recognized works include Kingdom Ethics and Changing Our Mind. But today he will be on the program to discuss his most recent book, Defending Democracy from Its Christian Enemies. And this is a little interesting note about his bio that we'll talk a little bit too, that David lives in Atlanta with his wife and, quote, he's awaiting a call from his beloved Atlanta Braves to resume the baseball career he abandoned in college. Oh, boy. David, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Nick. It's good to be with you today.
David, let's talk about this abandonment of your baseball career in college. Did you play baseball? Were you like a top recruit?
I played in high school, and that is a tongue-in-cheek bio there because when I went out for my college baseball team as a walk-on, I could tell in that first round my freshman year that my pitching skills were not up to college level baseball. And so I can say that I walked away rather than being cut, but I was going to be cut, I'm quite sure. So, but there's still a part of me that wishes I was out there on the pitcher's mound. I was a pitcher, left-handed pitcher. I played first base and outfield too, but my love was pitching, and it helped to shape who I am. And I still follow baseball avidly, especially my Atlanta Braves.
Yeah. So were you, what gave you that confidence coming out of high school to go like, yeah, I could probably do this at the college level? I mean, you were an all-conference pitcher and player?
I was a very good pitcher, but mainly I didn't think it was likely that I was good enough to play college baseball, but I just wanted to give it a try. So I did. And I still remember the moment that I knew that it was probably not going to work. It was a kind of a exhibition game against a team in Middle Virginia. And this guy hit a home run off of me that must have been about 700 feet. It was it was the most mammoth home run I had ever seen. And I just realized that, as they say, my stuff was not going to play at that level. And so I turned in the uniform and I said, thanks for the opportunity. And I went back into the thing that I was really called to do, which was I was preparing for ministry and academic work. And, but I still have a heart for baseball. Yeah.
Yeah. That was your come to Jesus moment, giving it your all and just got taken for all.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I love this baseball story because I grew up playing baseball as well. I played Little League and then all the way up through high school. And I played pitcher as well, catcher, second baseman, outfield. And it was just a game that I grew up loving because to me, there was nothing like holding that ball in your hand, right? And just giving a crisp throw to whoever it is, but then also like just fielding a grounder or getting a pop-up. Man, I just loved doing that. My only downside was that I was not that great of a hitter. But in high school in particularly, I was pretty fast. I was a fast and good athlete. So I was able to lay down these slashing bunts down the third baseline. The third baseman is not paying attention because he's way behind the bag, and I could, beat out all these throws. So I would get all these singles and steal my way to second base. But, I didn't have the confidence to give it a go at my local college like you did. So hats off to you for attempting that.
Well, it was worth a try. It is a great sport, and I'm glad to meet another serious baseball guy. Do you follow the Detroit Tigers?
I do, man. I not so much as I used to. I watched them growing up, and my favorite player was Alan Trammell, the Hall of Fame shortstop, and I used to go to all the games at the old Tiger Stadium, and now they have a new park, Comerica Park. Had all the gear and the hats, as you do when you watch the game or go to the park. So I'm gonna guess, you're just a little bit older than me. So you're probably, within the time frame of when, I was watching some of the games of your Atlanta Braves. With players like Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, Greg Maddux, David Justice, and the like. Do you have a favorite player?
Right now, I think it would be Matt Olson, their first baseman. But, coming as a pitcher, I was really impressed with that trio of Braves pitchers back in the day, Glavine, Maddux, and Smoltz. They were incredible. By the way, on my shelf here behind me, I think I could walk over and I could pick up. There's a picture of my son David with Alan Trammell. When we went to Tiger Stadium, we were on a kind of a baseball stadium tour, and Trammell was the manager, I believe. Wasn't he the manager of the Tigers for a while?
Yeah, for a year.
Yeah, and we were there, and Alan Trammell was just walking through the concourse, and he was willing to take a picture with my son.
That's real nice. Man, my dad, when I was a kid, he took me to a baseball card show because I'm going to assume too that you collected baseball cards.
I did for a while when I was little. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So I had a bunch of baseball cards, but I went to a baseball card show, or like a sports show, and Alan Trammell was there, and I was able to meet him, and he signed a card for me. Man, I just had it. Oh, yeah. I got it in this room. So it was a card from 1981. I think this was 3 years where he was into his career, and he wrote "Best wishes, Nick." Alan Trammell. That's where it's in my little box. There it is.
That is so cool. Look at that. I mean, baseball never far away, right?
Yeah. And then my wife, before we got married, she knew that I was an Alan Trammell fan, and so she got me a signed Alan Trammell Louisville Slugger bat, and it's in a nice little case as a keepsake.
That is so cool.
Yeah, love us some baseball. So, just before we got onto the program here, we were chatting a bit about this, and you've got an interesting thing that you do during podcasts, or I imagine when you're maybe doing some research. Do you want to? You got a little baseball in your hand. Yeah, what's that all about?
Well, when I was a kid, I was working on being a pitcher, and I was always working on my grips for curveball, changeup. I actually threw a knuckleball as well, fastball. And so I was always got in the habit of holding a baseball. Now, it's not every minute, but sometimes if I'm watching TV or if I'm on a podcast and I'm just kind of doing Q&A, I'll grab a baseball and I'll just hold on to it. So some people knit. I work on my curveball grip,
and how is it? Do you get to throw it with anybody?
Recently, no. My son and I used to throw well into his 20s, but then he got married, and so I don't I'm the kind of person who would always have a baseball and a baseball glove in the trunk of my car just in case there was an opportunity to play with somebody. It doesn't happen as much anymore, but yeah. So anyway, so happy baseball
Nice.
talk today.
That's real nice. My son, he's 8, and he's played kind of t-ball in Little League a bit. So, now that the weather is warming up here in Michigan, we go into the backyard and throw the ball around. But he's still afraid to catch it. He's like at that point where it hits his glove and then it bounces out because he doesn't know how to shut it.
When that changes and he's able to just do that fluidly, you guys will have thousands of happy hours doing that together, I'm sure.
Yeah, I recall reading maybe a headline from it was a story from the New York Times or somewhere else, but it was the story of this person just recalling their childhood memories, or even now just being able to spend time with whoever the adult figure was in their life, and just throwing the ball and having tons of conversations.
Absolutely, my dad
just
did that.
Fun.
Yeah.
I swear we will get to your book, but I got one more baseball question. So, your Atlanta Braves, they've been killing it within the past few years. But, when I was growing up, being a big baseball fan, the Atlanta Braves were killing it back then as well. So I went over to my friend's house. We had to be, this was 92. So I was 12 years old, and we were watching the National League Championship Series game 7, where the Braves were playing the Pittsburgh Pirates, and it was a tight game, right? But then I think this was the bottom of the ninth, where I think Francisco Cabrera or somebody hit the ball, right? And then Sid Bream slides into home to send them to the World Series. I mean, that's an all-time Atlanta Braves moment. Is that your moment? Do you have a different moment?
We started watching the Braves on TBS. Remember when you could watch Chicago Cubs or Atlanta Braves on those super stations? And so we started watching when my son was maybe 5. So that would have been 95. I do not recall seeing that Sid Bream slide in when it actually happened. But if you go to Braves games, they will still sometimes fire up the crowd by showing that play. It's one of the all-time Braves plays of the last 40 years. And Francisco Cabrera, anonymous guy, Sid Bream, who had no speed whatsoever, barely makes it in. Crowd goes crazy. Announcer goes crazy. So I would say in recent memory, my favorite Braves memory is when Jorge Soler in Game 6, I think it was, of the World Series against the Houston Astros, hit a moonshot home run. And that was the day that the Braves won their first World Series in a generation. And so beating Houston and winning the World Series in 2021, and that particular moment when you could believe they're actually going to do this, that's my favorite recent moment. So
yeah, that's great. Watching your lifelong team make it and win it. Oh, well, David, thanks for talking about baseball this morning. Now we can talk about your book, Defending the Democracy from Its Christian Enemies. But I want to get into it in this way. So on your bio, you mentioned that, your life's work is centered on what you call Christian ethics. So, I learned about this term just a few years ago, and I think it was a coming upon your work. So what does that mean, Christian ethics, to a listener who has never, heard of this term, who has never heard of an ethicist, let alone a Christian one?
Christian ethics is a discipline within the overall arena of Christian theology, Christian thought, that focuses on helping Christians think about their moral responsibilities, what it means to faithfully follow Jesus in everyday life. So, you notice in my bio that there's a lot of language of social ethics as well. So my work has focused especially on public issues like war and human rights and race and politics. So Christian ethicists help Christian people think about what a faithful Christian way of life looks like. And in all those kind of messy arenas of life, economics, war, government, etc., race. And so I've been doing that for 30 plus years. It's been meaningful work for sure.
And then so in part of those 30 years of work, you also know on your website that you love ethics, but quote, I do have the scars to show for it because these days people are far more likely to get really angry, and that really angry is in all caps, over ethical differences than theological ones. My battles have included issues like climate change, torture, LGBTQ inclusion, and white supremacism. Fun times. End quote. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by I have the scars to show for it?
Well, and that kind of gets us into the zip code of this book. Ethics deals with controversial issues that people argue about and disagree about, and they often argue very passionately about them. 500 years ago, people argued mainly about theology. Right now, it seems that people argue mainly about ethics, about race, about sexuality, politics. And so I've taken positions on issues that I felt like I needed to speak on. And especially in the social media era, it has been full of, the kinds of arguments, not just kind of polite academic arguments, but social media attacks and our divisions across, conservative versus liberal lines, Democrat versus Republican, even just you take one position on an issue versus another, people take those very seriously and sometimes kind of go to war with you about stuff. I've had friendships called off over issues. I've had, I've experienced, like so many people these days, my share of threats, including death threats. So people take this stuff very seriously, and when the passions run hot, I've been in it. In fact, I'm quite weary of it. I think that right now, this issue about whether democracy itself is threatened in the U.S. is one of those issues, because I believe that it is, and that Christians have their fingerprints all over the problem, and a lot of other Christians just don't see it that way, and so it's yet another thing for us to argue about.
Yeah. I thought this when you mentioned that, you have these scars, and then people get really angry. I thought that was a really interesting thing to note on your bio. So, I mean, did you put that not only to let a reader know that, hey, this is me, but was it like maybe a word of encouragement as well for those experiencing similar things?
Yeah. I've forgotten it. I guess that must be on my website. I think I've forgotten everything that's on there by now. But I wanted people who came to my website to know a little more of the personal side of me, and not just this book title and that article or whatever. Academics are often kind of remote and lofty, in the way they present their work and stuff. But yes, I encounter a lot of people who, like, they'll send me a message on Facebook or something or Instagram, and they'll say, I can't even, especially younger people, I can't even go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas or talk with my parents about anything related to politics because it gets so explosive so fast. The experience of conflict online or with family or with friends or people at church is everywhere right now in this country. And so it's just only honest for me to communicate that. And it is maybe encouraging hey, if you find yourself in arguments with people about this, you're not alone, because that's just everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard that from a number of folks, to include Kristen Dumais. So,
Yeah.
there's a couple blurbs on your book. One of those is by Kristen Dumais, author of Jesus and John Wayne: How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. She says that of your book, it's an immensely important book for our present moment. And then Doug Padgett, our listener base is, knowledgeable and has heard from Doug and knows about Christian well. But of Doug Padgett, he says of your book, the struggle against Christian nationalism has been a part of the United States since its founding, and that struggle is ours today. I am so grateful to have David Gushee in the mix and helping lead the way. So, David, I want to have you get in the mix and lead the way. And the way that I think we can do this is I'll in your introduction of your book, you have 4 points that you stress to the reader as they want to get into the book. So I'll point those out right now, and then we'll go back to that first topic, and I'll let you describe that more in depth. So those 4 points are, listener, if you have a piece of paper or something, you should be taking notes on this. So point number 1 is Christians should support democracy because despite its many imperfections, it is the best political system developed. Number 2, many Christians in the United States and around the world favor or are open to authoritarian and reactionary political trends that pose a grave threat to open and free democracy. Number 3, due to this tendency, Christians turn out to be among the leading threats to democracy in much of the world, and this is not at all where Christians should be located politically. And finally, number 4, responsible Christians need to recommit to democracy, with Christian leaders guiding the Christian community towards a defense and practice of democracy that fit with the convictions of Christian ethics. So, David, right from the top, first, why should Christians support democracy despite its many imperfections?
Well, because of human nature and the difficulty of organizing communities in a way that is fair and just and sustainable, human history is littered with the carcasses of political systems and governments that have failed, that have failed because of the corruption of the leaders, or you might say the design flaw of the system. I have extensive discussion in the book about how much of political history in the world has been a history of authoritarian government, dictators, monarchs, tyrants, and the tendency to consolidate power in one person or one ruling elite that can do whatever they want to other people without any limits on their power. Democracy is the system that overcame that tendency and sent power into the hands of the people to organize government for themselves, and to have government be not about the power of one person, but the will of a democratically organized community. And so democracy, which really only got a lot of momentum to become a major political system relatively recently, beginning in the late 18th century and then growing in the 19th century and then even more in the 20th. Democracy has sometimes been described as the least bad political system available. It's because human beings are messed up. Democracy often gets messed up. But what democracy does is to give the people the ultimate authority to select their leaders, to recall their leaders or vote them out, and to make the rules that govern the system. Democracy, with the rule of law, also prevents or at least create systems to prevent the abuse of individuals or of groups by powerful people. It protects human rights. It protects people's chance to have a say in how they are governed. And it also proves to be more sustainable because when people are mistreated, they will rebel. But when a government when a democratic government is working well, people know that they have a chance to change things by voting and by running for office and by organizing themselves within the democratic system. So I think people have kind of lost. A lot of people have lost a sense of why democracy itself is a good thing and why it should be protected. And so this book is partly intended to say, hey, hold on to this flawed but good political system because you will not like the alternative if that's what it comes to.
Yeah, you have, there was a quote in your book where you say democracy is not only the best governance option heretofore developed, but in fact, one of the highest achievements of humanity. It took centuries to advance beyond authoritarian government, and we dared not go backward now. That was, I was reading through it. I think we take it for granted, right, as citizens of the United States, that it took centuries to get here, and that this democracy is still a new system with its imperfections. Could you define a few things that you see as the imperfections of this democracy, or as democracy is attempted?
Its democracy is challenged by sometimes the lack of interest or lack of attention of the people, so that power is always at risk of being concentrated in the hands of those who are paying attention. I mean, in our country, even at a highly contested presidential election, still at least a third of the people won't even vote. So that inattention means that, in a sense, people who are paying attention have more power. Democracy is supposed to diffuse power so that everybody has a voice, but the role of money in politics tends to concentrate a disproportionate amount of power in the hands of those who have wealth. That's not supposed to be how democracy works. That's actually how oligarchy works, or aristocracy works. And so that's a challenge. Our democracy has always been damaged by the historic racism that has infected our society from the beginning. And in fact, the question as to whether this is going to be a democracy where everybody's voice counts or whether it's just going to be a democracy for white people is one of the oldest challenges in our system. And democracy can be susceptible to the demagogue, the person who plays on the passions and emotions and the fears and the hatreds of a part of the population. And that was something that the founders of our country were worried about from the beginning, that an irresponsible demagogue would get the hearts of the people. And also there's always the issue of how you have enough power, for example, in the presidency, enough power to get stuff done, but not too much power so that the democracy is undermined because the person at the top has too much power. So you have to have, it's like a recipe. You have to have just enough of this ingredient, but not too much. So in a democracy, you need to have enough executive power, but not too much. You need to have enough checks and balances, but not too much. You need to have the ability to pass laws, but also to slow them down so they're not just the product of passion and anger or something. So it's really delicate. Our system was built with tremendous sophistication. It wasn't flawless, but it was built with tremendous sophistication to get all of those ingredients right. And but it's like after a while, when something's been going on for generations, you feel like it'll just always be there and always work pretty well. But I think it's actually not working very well, which is one of the reasons why it's under threat right now, I think.
Yeah. And, you make it clear in that first point in the introduction. So like you say, you you put forward the idea that Christians should support democracy. Now, so I am a Christian myself. I have been my entire life, and many in West Michigan are. But when I hear that term, I'm just go like, well, yeah, duh. As American, citizens, like, yeah, I never really saw it from this opposite side of Christians would not. So why would you? Could you explain that? Like, why should Christians support democracy?
Well, let's do it this way. Here's why some Christians have not supported democracy or didn't, and why some of them are tempted not to now. Democracy says that the people decide. The people elect representatives who decide things like whether abortion will be allowed, or how schools will appoint leaders and teach children. But because the people decide, that means that the people, they may be, from somebody's perspective, they may be right or wrong in what they decide, but whatever they decide, that's what it's going to be. So some Christians were opposed to democracy because they did not trust people with that kind of power. They thought that what you needed was a Christian monarch or a Christian clergy group, like in Iran. In Iran, they have some dimensions of democracy, but ultimately the Ayatollahs decide what's going to happen in Iran, right? According to their interpretation of Muslim religion. There are Christians who really think that's how it should be here, that what we need is a Christian country, and Christian leaders, including presidents and clergy, should decide what the laws should be. We can't trust that to people because people can make wrong decisions, right? So the will of the people may be wrong. What do you do about that? Well, in a democracy, you let the people decide, and then you have these constant elections and constant legislative debate in which they can decide something different next time.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say, that in that second point about reactionary, many Christians in the U.S. do in fact believe that our democracy has produced a lot of outcomes that they don't agree with, especially since the 60s. And if you've ever talked to Christians, or maybe if you're listening today, maybe you're like this, who feel like the country has kind of lost its way, made all kinds of wrong decisions. And so some people are in a reactionary posture. I know Christians who, there's almost nothing that has happened in this country since the 1960s that they think is good. It's all bad. Civil rights movement, they might even say, or feminist movement, or abortion, or divorce, or the sexual revolution, or the gay rights movement. And to the extent that all these things have been accepted in the law, some of these Christians say that should never have happened. So the reason some Christians are a threat to democracy now is because they're so alienated from what has happened in our law and culture since the 60s that they're open to authoritarian, anti-democratic solutions to, as they would say, make America great again, or make America Christian again, according to what they think that ought to look like.
Yeah, and I think we're stepping in here into your second point is like the why for the Christians favor or are open to authoritarian and reactionary political trends. So is there there's things culturally that they have disagreed with vehemently. We could go back to the 1960s and civil rights, the civil rights movement. But how do you tie that together? Are there what's the biblical theology that kind of puts them in this kind of fundamentalist position and says that's not what we want for our country? We need to take it back and go make it look like this. Why are they open to that?
Well, there are Bible passages that can be cited for every one of the specific positions that they would hold, like the patriarchal types who believe that women should be subordinate to men. There are Bible passages that they can quote, right? The idea that sex belongs only in heterosexual marriage and everything else should be banned. There are lots of Bible passages one could quote. The idea that the country should be governed by the law of God, not by what people come up with just on their own, that's really more of like an Old Testament paradigm. You know, you could just, if you're borrowing the Old Testament as your paradigm for what the country should look like, then you could get there. The term Christian nationalism has been used, I pick a different term, but it has been used to describe an overall theological and political framework that goes something like this. The United States of America was and should be a Christian nation governed by Christian people who are following Christian morality and advancing Christian religion. And there are people, many millions of people in the U.S., that really is their vision. And so they look at abortion and they say that doesn't fit, or gay marriage, they say that doesn't fit. Sometimes it has a racial dimension. And so some people who talk about Christian nationalism actually talk about white Christian nationalism. So the idea really implicitly or explicitly, often it's implicit, is that actually America was and should be a country dominated by white Christians. And so then if you have that piece of it, then you get the racism on the table and the xenophobia. So you can have an anti-immigrant thing going there. You can also have a kind of an anti-civil rights movement thing going there. So the people who have written about white Christian nationalism say you put all that together, you add a kind of Christian nation ideology, white people in charge, men in charge, traditional morality in charge. And imagine people who what they want passionately more than anything is that kind of country. And I argue in the book that people who have had that agenda for the last couple of generations, they kind of keep losing in the democratic process because they don't have the majority of Americans with them. They just keep losing. Mm-hmm. So what happens if you keep losing and you believe you should win and that God wants you to win, and democracy is not working right, not giving you the results that you want? Well, then maybe you begin to flirt with non-democratic alternatives. If democracy doesn't give you God's will, maybe God's will be achieved in some other way. Mm-hmm. And so, either you fiddle with democracy itself or you consider authoritarian strategies. Maybe what we want is to elect a godly Christian leader who won't really worry too much about the Constitution.
Yeah. Could you, so you mentioned it here, and you mentioned Christian nationalism is, I think you say in the book, it's like a shorthand way of describing a situation. But you've come up with this new term, authoritarian, reactionary Christianity?
You got it. ARC, baby.
ARC. Uh-huh. And there's a whole, kind of a page in your book that kind of puts this together, outlines it. Could you share that with your with the listeners here and what that means? Because that's a big part of your book.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I've begun already. I would say authoritarian means these are people who have either a fundamental distrust of democracy for some of the reasons that I've been talking about, either just as a system, or they don't trust the way American democracy has been developing. Okay. They're more attracted to like people who will centralize power and just dictate that things will be the way that these folks think they should be. And in the book, as you know, I compare other countries. It's more clear when you look at other countries. Like Vladimir Putin in Russia functions as an authoritarian, reactionary Christian dictator, basically. What's going to happen in Russia is exactly what he says is going to happen. He has centralized power. And a lot of his officially stated ideology is negative reaction against Western liberalism and secularism and such. And so he functions as an authoritarian, reactionary Christian dictator in Russia. So does less extreme, less deadly, but the president of Hungary, Viktor Orban, same basic idea. Centralized power, articulate a reactionary ideology against liberalism, immigration, secularism, gay rights, and all that, and then bend government to do what he thinks government should do. Some people are looking for that kind of leader here, and some people think Donald Trump is that person. Some people thought Ron DeSantis was going to be that person if he had been successful, right? And some of the governors in red states are showing some authoritarian tendencies. Reactionary means a posture of disdain or contempt or negative reaction to, like I said, pretty much everything that has happened since 1962, which is the year that I was born. So that's how I always remember it. That was when you had the first Supreme Court decision saying the schools can't organize Christian prayers. Public schools can't organize Christian prayers because of the separation of church and state. And Bible teaching in public schools, same thing. You got to respect the rights of religious minorities. You do that, you got the civil rights movement, you got those Supreme Court decisions, you got Roe versus Wade, gay rights movement, feminist movement. There is a population that considers all of those things wrong moves, and they are in negative reaction to them. So authoritarian reactionary Christian politics is the politics of that slice of the traditionalist Christian community that would like to reverse all of those changes if they could, and who are attracted to authoritarianism, including Trump's version of authoritarianism, because they find that democracy has not really been giving them what they want.
Yeah, you have let's see here, a quote, another quote from the book is, when Christian authoritarianism hooks up with fierce cultural reaction, when it is highly politicized, and when that politicization becomes genuinely anti-democratic, it can become a profound problem for society as a whole. So let's move into your third point in the book that you stress is that as Christians tend to be among the leading threats to democracy, as under this ARC, authoritarian, reactionary Christian politics, you ask the question, the question is, where should they be located politically? So where, you make the move towards, from one thing, this ARC to another. And so where should Christians in democracy be located politically?
Yeah. And by that, I am not saying you should be a member of this or that political party, right? Partly because I have an international perspective. And if you go to different countries, there are different political parties. So it's really not about a partisan identification. What I'm trying to say there is, because democracy is a valuable, in fact, I call it a tremendous achievement in human civilization, we should be pro-democracy. Even if we don't like the results of the democracy sometimes, we should participate within the guardrails of the democratic system. So it should really matter to us, probably more than any other consideration, whether the politicians that we are looking at are respectful of democratic norms and laws, whether they respect the results of elections, whether they discourage political violence or not, whether they respect the free press, whether they encourage the peaceful transfer of power. In other words, democratic laws and rules and norms are more important than anything else if you're going to preserve a democracy. So that's why I was worried about Trump from the beginning, because I heard him saying things that are outside those guardrails. From 2015 forward, in fact, I quote these political scientists who say who said already in 2017 that Trump was showing authoritarian tendencies because of delegitimizing political opponents as if they're enemies of the country, threatening a free press and the media, encouraging or at least turning a blind eye to threats of political violence, and showing contempt for the democratic rules of the game, like respecting the results of elections. So where should Christians be located? Bottom line, we should be Democrats, little d. We should be committed to the democratic process. And then once you're in that arena, then you can have all kinds of arguments about what should the law be about abortion, or what should it be about race, or what should it be about taxes. But if you don't have a democratic process, then none of that matters. If you don't have a democratic system, then what we think about this or that thing doesn't matter, because the dictator will tell us what the laws will be.
Mm-hmm.
We should be opposed to dictatorship and authoritarianism, threats of political violence, misuse of the military, misuse of and abuse of the legal system. My dissertation was about Nazi Germany and about the Holocaust. I cut my teeth as a scholar on what happens when a democracy collapses and a dictatorship develops. What happens is people go to jail without legal rights, and people get killed, and political adversaries get beat up in the streets and stuff like that. It's like, I don't think enough Americans have a vivid enough sense of what can happen when democracy goes away. Mm. So where should we be positioned? We should be positioned to protect the norms of democracy. You can vote Republican or vote Democrat as long as the candidate is committed to democracy. But any candidate who is not committed to democracy should be ruled out from the get-go, because they are threatening the system itself. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
That's something that we're stressing here locally as we encounter political groups and candidates kind of doing the same thing. There's we're trying to stress that, hey, this is not a Republican Democrat situation. This is about the democracy and wanting to return to the customs and norms, traditions of good government.
I could name you dozens of Republican politicians who I could support, or at least who I respect deeply, because they've taken a stand for democracy itself. And didn't you have a congressman there, Peter Meyer? Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah. Yep. Peter Meyer.
And wasn't he somebody who voted for impeachment and then got pushed out by the Republican party there in your area? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, you got it. Peter Meyer, a Republican congressman in his freshman term, and this was the very first thing he had to vote on, and it was to impeach President Trump for inciting insurrection. And as his first vote, he knew, and he said as much, that it was political suicide to vote yes for that. So he knew he was making a vote of integrity and ethics. But he was ultimately pushed out. I think with some help by the Democratic Party too, because well, number one, the candidate running against him was an extreme Republican, John Gibbs. So the extremism, John Gibbs had that going for himself, but then the Democratic Party, helped to promote that issue as, hey,
they thought they could win with it by having a weaker Republican candidate, and they did, right? They got that seat, right?
Yeah.
But see, so
they ended up getting that seat. But he's one of those many few and far in between who are, speaking out and doing such things, speaking in favor of democracy.
So that's what I'm talking about. I want every American Christian to know the difference between a Peter Meyer and you might say a mini Trump authoritarian. And to support people who believe in democracy, support Mitt Romney, support Liz Cheney, support people who actually are ironclad committed to democratic norms. You know who turned out to be one of those was Mike Pence.
Yeah.
At the pivotal moment,
Yeah. Fascinating. The people that you mentioned, like Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, Mike Pence, they've written books about these things, and they've said, as much. But and so we're hoping to highlight those folks and say, hey, this isn't. You don't have to be just one or the other. There are still viable and good candidates along the way, whether you're R or D. But we should be focused on something else, and that is democracy.
Yes.
David, we have a few minutes left, and I want to get to this last point. The last point, number 4, is how do Christian leaders guide their communities toward a defense and practice of democracy that fit with the convictions of Christian ethics? And I'm going to say, like, just personally, I think this is, to me, this is really important. I grew up in the church. I went to, a mega church, if you will. And, when 2020 happened and the Trump administration, et cetera, I felt like the church itself didn't have the tools or didn't know how to speak adequately to what was going on. So I was left in kind of this space, and so many people that I knew were in this space as well. And I think this is just a great question to land on. So how do these Christian leaders guide their communities within a conviction of good Christian ethics?
I think that you are exactly right, that many pastors and leaders did not have the vocabulary or the tools to say, here's why this crosses a line, and here's why, as pastor, I must blow the whistle on this. They didn't have the ethics. They didn't have the ethics vocabulary. In the book, I just highlight 3 specific resources within the Christian ethical tradition that are available to us if we will just dig around and pull them out and use them. And they are the pro-democratic tradition that I especially identify with the Baptist and congregational traditions. But basically, I tell a historical narrative about how part of what led to the birth of modern democracy was the dissenting voices of, for example, Baptists and Congregationalists in England when they were resisting religious tyranny on the part of the monarchy. And that's part of how we got democracy, was Christians saying, you know what, absolute power is available to abuse minority religious traditions. We need to have human rights, and we need to have a voice in how we are governed so that we don't get executed for believing the wrong version of Christianity, right? So I call it the pro-democratic traditions of Christianity, and there's lots of them. I also mentioned the covenantal tradition, especially is associated with Calvinism, which is such an important part of your region there in West Michigan, right? The covenantal tradition emphasizes that political communities and church communities should be understood to be a covenant of the people, not belonging to the pastor or belonging to the king, but the community belongs to the people who make a sacred covenant together as to how, with God and each other, as to what kind of community they will develop. So the covenantal tradition is actually pro-democratic because it says that the polity, the state, the school board, the county council, the church, the United States of America, the polity belongs to the people, and the people are governed by the covenant that they have made with each other. You might say that the Constitution is kind of like the U.S. covenant document. So we need people who are covenantal. The fundamental problem with Donald Trump is he's never kept a covenant in his life, right? He doesn't have any feel for sacred covenant obligations because it's always just about what benefits him. That's deadly in politics, in government. We need people who will keep the covenant. And then I emphasize the Black Christian tradition of resistance and dissent, and their, I call it the abolitionist tradition, the pro-democratic dissenting Black tradition, which has always said, we believe in the American covenant, include us in it on equal terms with everyone else. So traditions that go back 500 years that are pro-democracy, pro-covenant, and pro-equality for everyone, these are Christian traditions that pastors and other leaders ought to be able to pull out and say, why should we support democracy? Here's 3 good reasons.
Yeah, I wonder, David, as kind of some faith communities, Christian leaders work through this, like what maybe historical figures would you recommend to them? One for me that comes to mind is, there's an obvious, the MLKs, or, to me, I've studied and learned about Frederick Douglass, of the abolitionist movement. What other historical figures would you point people to say, hey, check these people out and learn? You can learn a lot from them.
In the book, I mentioned Richard Overton, who was an English Baptist who made an argument for religious liberty in the 17th century. There's Roger Williams up in New England. He was a dissenter from the Puritan establishment, and he had an interesting religious career. But Roger Williams, the early Baptists, like John Leland in Virginia, who said to Thomas Jefferson, we will not support the ratification of the Constitution unless there is religious liberty. You have certainly you have the abolitionist figures. It's really such a rich array of voices. Frederick Douglass is mentioned in the book, Martin Luther King, but also W.E.B. Du Bois, a number of African-American voices. Of course, you have the indigenous voices, Native American voices, arguing for a democracy in this country that would include them instead of trample over them. I'm reading a lot of work these days by a man named George Tinker, but there have been others. I'm thinking of in the covenantal tradition. It's not Calvin himself because he was more theocratic, but there are voices, a kind of modern covenantalists. There's a guy named Jim Skillen who's written about a kind of a reformed pro-democratic vision. So there's a lot of folks, but one place to start would be to read those last 3 chapters of my democracy book and follow the sources that I cite, and then look in the bibliography for some of those sources. But these are resources. I'm firmly convinced that one of the things that has gone wrong is because we have not taught these voices. We've not taught the tradition, the pro-democratic traditions of Christianity. There was a vacuum, and that vacuum was filled by Trump and by people around Trump. I should also mention Reinhold Niebuhr in the 20th century did an awful lot of good writing about democracy in the middle of the threat of both communism and Nazism. And so C.S. Lewis has some good stuff on democracy. So there are plenty of voices. In the Catholic world, after Vatican II in the 60s, they reversed the old Catholic position and defended democracy as the position that Catholics should support. So there's Catholic documents that are pro-democracy. So there's a wealth of materials, but most people don't have them at their fingertips. And now we realize we have to equip our people with these resources before it's too late.
Yeah, there you go, listener. You've got some homework to do, but you can find that list or more of those resources in David's book. All right, David. Before our last minute here, I gotta find this out from you because you are from Atlanta, and this is kind of a little bit that we got running on the program. So Atlanta is the home of Coca-Cola, correct?
Yes.
So, are you a Coke person or a Pepsi person?
I am a Coke person. When I go into a restaurant and they say we do Pepsi products here, I will drink it, but not happily.
Yeah,
So
not happily. Have you tried the Coca-Cola spiced?
no, I have not.
David, you should. This is a very new product. You should give it a whirl. I mean, if you like any of the other like cherry Cokes or vanilla flavored, or even this is not on the market anymore, but there was a coffee Coke, like a coffee flavored one. I find them all enjoyable. I am a Coke person, but this Coke spiced. Next time you go to your grocery store or gas station, see if you can find that one. It gives it a little something that I find enjoyable.
I'll check that out, Nick. Absolutely.
All right, friends. That is author David Gushee of the book Defending Democracy from Its Christian Enemies, which makes a robust case for a renewed commitment to democracy on the part of Christians, not by succumbing to secular liberalism, but by drawing on our own best traditions. Any concerned Christian will leave its pages with eyes wide open to the dangers of our current form of political engagement. And readers will gain an insight into what democracy is truly meant to be and why Christians once supported it wholeheartedly and should do so again. And I've read the book. It's 200 pages, so a really very readable, but it's also an audio book as well, if that's your thing. So I've done both. And you can find his books wherever books are sold. Is that correct, David? Do you have a preference for this?
I support local bookstores. It's in a lot of local bookstores. It's been in Barnes and Noble, certainly Amazon, and yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get to it. But yeah.
Also published by Erdman's, which is in West Michigan here. So
that's right. Yep.
If that's any incentive to a listener. So, David, thank you for your time this morning. It's a really good conversation talking about baseball, Coca-Cola, and how to support democracy. So thank you very much.
Summertime conversation: baseball, Coca-Cola, and democracy. Yes. Thank you, Nick, for having me on your show, and all the best to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Listener, you can stay informed in 2024. We'd love to hear from you. What did you think of our conversation with David? Was this topic helpful for you? What would you like us to talk about in upcoming episodes? Be sure to leave your comments on our Facebook page under this podcast episode. Also, be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter at votecommongood-wm.org, where you'll receive notifications about the podcast and event updates. And with a note on event updates, we are having another live podcast event Sunday, June 16, Father's Day, at Park Theater in Holland from 5:30 to 8:30. This live podcast event will feature 3 3-hour-long segments where we'll focus on my recent border experience along the U.S.-Mexico border. And I believe Doug Padgett will be in town for this event as well. So we're going to share about what it really kind of looks like and feels like along the U.S. border, and then what it feels like on the opposite of that border in Mexico. And let me just tell you that it is very different, very different. The United States border has clearly a very defensive posture. It made me feel like I was in Afghanistan circa 2007 when I was in the Air Force during the global war on terrorism. But when I got to the Mexico side, it was completely different. Just along the wall, people were walking their dogs, riding bicycles, just going for a stroll. There were trees. There was a community, literally houses upon houses on the adjacent side to the wall. Man, and I'd love to just share this experience with you. Our second segment will feature Sarah Leach and Mitchell Boatman of the Holland Sentinel, and they'll be talking about why they've been covering Ottawa Impact over the past 15 months or so, the challenges of that, and then just the overall challenges of being a newspaper, if you will, in the community where across the United States there are so many news deserts, and how this is important in West Michigan. And finally, two common good candidates, Chris Crothers, Democrat running in Zeeland, and Phil Kyers, Republican running in District 9, Grand Haven Township. They'll be talking about their campaign and why they've committed to talk about the common good and support the common good in their campaign as they run to defeat Ottawa Impact candidates. So that's your update about upcoming events. Sunday, June 16, Father's Day at Park Theater. Hope to see you there. This is a free show. And finally, before we get out, follow us on our socials with Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel. Thanks, everybody, for joining this Common Good conversation. Till next time, be the common good in West Michigan.